helpful. And then you can introduce the speaker, and the speaker is in charge after that. Okay. Okay, so Laura is a member of the Public Policy Committee of AAUW Birmingham. And she suggested the speaker, got him for us, and I'm going to let her take it from here. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Sally. I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Dr. David Dulio. He's professor of political science at Oakland University and also director for the Center of Civic Engagement. Dr. Dulio's areas of expertise include campaigns and elections, Congress, politics, interest groups, political parties and interest groups, and then other areas of American politics. He's written 13 books, dozens of chapters and articles. You may also be familiar with him from either hearing him or seeing him in local or national media, because he gets consulted about political issues a lot. And before I turn this over for him to talk to us about the 2022 election and the future of democracy, I just want to put in a plug for the Center for Civic Engagement, which I think does a lot of programs that members of AAUW would like. And on that note, David, it's all yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura. I really appreciate the invitation. It's a pleasure to see everybody. I'm doubly happy to see Laura, who I had the distinct pleasure and honor of working with during my first many years on OU's campus. I can't remember how long it's been since you've retired. How many years now, Laura?
4.
4 years? Okay. So my first 15 or so years on campus, it was, she's sorely missed on campus for many reasons. And before I forget, I'll plug a couple things that we're doing with the center right off the top, so I don't forget. Number one is a week from today at 7 p.m. We're going to do a session that we call office hours. It's where we gather OU faculty experts to talk about a timely and important issue. And next Wednesday, we're going to talk about the war in Ukraine. 1 year later, where does it stand? What does it mean for the international community, et cetera, et cetera. And then in March 9th, we're going to talk about the rise of anti-Semitism in the United States. If anybody's interested in attending either or both of those, just let me know, and we'll get you signed up and get you where you need to be. So for this one, Laura asked me to talk about, or we talked about me talking about the 2022 elections and the sort of the future of democracy. So we'll talk about both of those. And you know, I have one rule when I do these things. And that's that there are no rules. So we'll do whatever you want. If you want to talk about something that I show you on the screen, let's talk about it. If you want to know more or ask a question, that's great. If you want to argue with me, that's fine too. Let's just be nice to each other and be civil. But it's fun. It's fun to have back and forth. So I'll talk for a while and then certainly take whatever questions you have either during or at the end if you prefer to wait. So, you know, we can't really talk about 2022 without talking about the history of Michigan for a while. And I'm going to take you back several election cycles and show you a few maps. Here's Michigan in 2008, and it is a map of election results by county with the party of the plurality candidate. So whoever got the most votes by county is shaded, right? So of course, this is with 2008, Barack Obama's first election as president. And there's a lot of blue all over the map. He won everywhere. He won going away nationally and in Michigan. But that changes dramatically when we get to 2012. His re-election is also fairly easy, yet we see a lot more red on the map than in the previous version. And frankly, this takes us back to Michigan as it sort of is usually would look, right? This is a much more quote unquote normal version of Michigan than 2008 would have led us to believe. And then the big shift comes from 12 to 16. And of course, 2016 is Donald Trump's surprising victory in Michigan. And you see a lot of red all over the place. In fact, Hillary Clinton wins a plurality of votes in only 8 of 83 counties, which is a stunning number, frankly. Lots of red, and just look at the shift in our state in just a period of 8 years, and how different elections can look when we examine results this way. This is Gretchen Whitmer's first election in 2018. And you'll of note there are the light blue counties that Whitmer took back from Trump, if you will, right? These are the ones that went from red to blue. So, and if we go back, right, it looks a lot more like the 2012 map than anything else. So this is sort of a more return to normal, if you will, for Michigan. Now, here's another way to look at the same data. This is a map from the New York Times that shows from 2012 to 2016, the shift by county. Each one of those arrows is a county in Michigan, and the direction of the arrow, and the color for that matter. So red and to the right is a shift in voting preferences in that county that got more Republican. The arrows that are, and there's only 4 of them, and they're really small, are counties that got more Democratic, right? So that's 12 to 16. This map is the same source, and it is, however, from 16 to 20. So that is what Joe Biden and the Democrats did in the presidential election after Trump. You see a lot more shift back to the left, and so Michigan is the state that can and does go back and forth, right? It is a swing state, and in fact, a lot of times, and this was a critical flaw in Hillary Clinton's loss in 2016, was the fact that Democrats can sometimes take it for granted and just assume that Michigan is a Democratic state, and there's some reason to believe that, but in fact, Michigan is a very competitive state, and was in 2022 as well, which I'll show you in a minute. The thing to talk about with 22 right at the top for me is the context of this election. And the biggest thing for me when we think about elections like 22 is that it's a midterm election. What you have here is every midterm election prior to 22 back to FDR in 1938. And the purple and yellow bars are gains or losses for the president's party in the House and the Senate. So House in purple, Senate in yellow. Anything above the zero line is the president's party gaining seats in either the House or the Senate. Anything below the 0 line is a loss for the president's party in either the House or the Senate. So in midterms, the president's party usually gets killed. I mean, it's a, we already got a chat. Let's see. Oh, rats. Jerry, I can't help you with that. Maybe turn up your volume. Anyway, so these bars tell us that in all but two midterm elections back to 1938, the president's party lost seats in the House of Representatives. And I would make the case that both 02 and 98 are artificial gains by the president's party. 2002 is very easy to understand and think about. 1 year after 9/11, the country was largely still united. Very, very different political context in that time, certainly than now, and in really every other cycle. In 98, if you'll remember, that was right at the time of the Clinton impeachment and the Monica Lewinsky scandal. And Republicans really screwed up in 1998. They tried to make and wanted to make the 1998 elections all about impeachment. And they did, and it backfired. And because the American public didn't want to hear about impeachment, they wanted to hear about issues. And that drove Democratic candidates in the House to do really well. But in other instances, right, whether it's Clinton 4 years prior to that, Democrats lost 54 seats. In 2010, President Obama's first midterm, Democrats lost 63 seats. In 1938, Democrats lost 71 seats, an amazing loss of seats in the House. And certainly with Trump, Republicans lost about 40 seats in 2018. So we would expect Democrats to have had a tough year in 2022. History tells us that that's the pattern. Now, there are more instances where the president's party picks up seats in Senate contests, including in 2018 with President Trump when Republicans gained 3. But those are, it's generally because those Senate contests are generally more competitive and much more, well, I shouldn't say that. Leave it at that they're competitive. So the question is, why is this the case? And I think that they have, there are two competing explanations, if you will, or theories behind why this is the case. And I think, in fact, they're both in play, if you will, in 2022. The first is that midterm elections represent and and the voters think of midterms as a referendum on the president, and that 2 years into the presidency, some voters, many voters for that matter, are dissatisfied, frustrated, angry with how the president is doing, and want to take out their frustration on somebody. But the fact that the president is not on president's not on the ballot means that he can't take the he doesn't take the ire of the public. Rather, they have to take it out on the president's party's candidates. So midterm as a referendum, one theory. Theory number two is called surge and decline. And what that gets at is there's usually a surge in voter turnout in a presidential year of folks who are, let's just say, not habitual voters, that they are part-time voters. And then in the midterm, those voters go away and there's a decline in voter turnout. So many of those folks that came out to vote for the president in the presidential election don't show up at the polls in the midterm. Therefore, some of that support for the president and maybe his party's candidates goes away. So midterm as referendum is theory one. Theory two is surge and decline theory. Now, in terms of midterm as referendum, the most important factor in that sort of train of thought is presidential job approval. And here's Joe Biden's job approval rating over time, but at the end point there is just right after Election Day. So, call it a day or two. The president was at least 10 points underwater and only 41% job approval. That's pretty bad. We would expect, given those kinds of job approval ratings, that the president's party would get. Question? Okay. Given a job approval rating of 42%, we would expect the president's party to do pretty poorly on Election Day. Of course, that's not. Now, Democrats lost some seats in the House, enough to give control in the chamber to Republicans, and that's why we have Kevin McCarthy as Speaker rather than Nancy Pelosi or maybe even Hakeem Jeffries. But not as many seats as we would have thought. And of course, Democrats even gain a seat in the Senate. And so that's sort of the contextual piece of this. And here's Biden's job approval compared to the previous presidents. And with the exception of, where'd it go? It's hard to see, but the exception of Reagan, Biden's job approval is worse at the midterm than everybody else. Maybe we could say he's right at parity with Trump, but he was worse off than Obama, much worse off than George W. And here's why Republicans were still able to do okay in the not okay. They did well by gaining seats in the 2002 midterms. Right after 9/11, George W. Bush's job approval rating spikes to record levels, over 90%. Of course, that starts to go away over time, but he remained fairly popular, 65, 70% job approval. So of course, Biden below George W., below Clinton, below HW, and then Reagan at or tied. So again, the context would tell us that Biden and the Democrats would do pretty poorly in 2022. That's not what happened. And here in Michigan, Democrats had a terrific Election Day, sweeping the top of the ticket and retaking control of the state House and state Senate. And if for my money, there are two big takeaways as to why that was the case. Number one, candidates matter. And I'll dive into this in a bit more detail here in a minute. But and this is one of those things in political science that is, well, duh. I mean, there's nothing really novel in the idea that candidates matter. Well, in fact, they really do, and they matter in dramatic ways. And the other factor is that the abortion issue was. It's difficult to overstate how important it was. It was massive. So digging in on candidates matter. Here's one piece of data as a way to look at this. So what you've got here is the Associated Press and their vote cast. This is basically the new way that the Associated Press does exit polling. And if you haven't seen exit polls before, this is how we read them. Democrats made up 44% of the electorate on Election Day, while Republicans made up 48% of the electorate on Election Day, or absentee ballots, right? It's not just Election Day. That's what's different these days about the AP Votecast, is they're better able to capture absentee voters. Anyway, point number one is Republicans outperformed Democrats in terms of voter turnout. Usually, when we see a 48-44 split in terms of Republicans or something like it, Republicans would have a really good day when the ballots are counted. But that again did not prove to be the point. Point number two, while independents were only 8% of voters, Democratic candidates at the House level won them 39% to 35% over Republican candidates. So Democrats win independents in 2022. Huge factor. Another way to look at this. So here's, we talked before about job approval. Not a shock to see that those who thought, or I should put it this way, those who strongly approved of Biden's job approval rating, strongly approved of the president, Democratic House candidates won them by a 94% margin. Not a surprise. Even those that they that somewhat approved, Democrats plus 84. Again, not a surprise. Those, if you don't like the way Joe Biden's doing his job, Republicans won him by 91%. Here's the surprising one. Those voters who were somewhat disapproving of the president voted for Democratic House candidates by 4 points. So if you were on the president, you still voted Democratic. That is highly, highly unusual. So the question is, okay, why are these folks that are about Biden still voting for Democrats? Well, it's because Republicans put up terrible candidates at the congressional level. Just terrible candidates. Here are, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 7. These are the 7 hottest U.S. Senate rates: Nevada, Ohio, Georgia, Arizona, New Hampshire, Ohio, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. These 7 Senate races were all in states that also had a governor's race. And if memory serves, the only one on this list where, no, that's not, that is incorrect. I take that back. But in many of these, the Republican gubernatorial candidate won, but the Senate candidate did poorly. So what this shows you is that Don Bolduc in New Hampshire, he did 25 points worse at the ballot box than the Republican gubernatorial candidate. John Sununu in New Hampshire a Republican did 25 points better than their Senate candidate. Even though J.D. Vance won his Senate race, Mike DeWine, the gubernatorial candidate, did 9 points better. Herschel Walker did 8.5 points worse than Kemp in the Georgia gubernatorial race. Blake Masters, this is hard to believe, did 3 points worse than Kerry Lake. And Kerry Lake is a nut job, right? Yet he did worse. Here's one to really think about. Mehmet Oz, Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania loses to John Fetterman. John Fetterman, the guy that campaigned in shorts and a t-shirt and who just had a stroke. Not to talk bad about the guy. He's went to the hospital last night because he was feeling lightheaded. But Dr. Oz actually did 10 points better than the Republican gubernatorial candidate in Pennsylvania. How bad was he if Mehmet Oz did better? One other thing to note is that everybody on this list is an incumbent or is a challenger except Ron Johnson. Ron Johnson, sitting senator, won his race in Wisconsin. And my point by showing you that is this is about candidate recruitment. Republicans recruited bad candidates in important races, candidates who could not win a general election. And that was definitely the case in Senate races, right? So if we take many of these same states, in Pennsylvania, Republican U.S. House candidates won by 2 points statewide. Democrats won that Senate race by 5, right? In every one of these states, and in some cases like Ohio, it's a huge gap. These Senate candidates did worse than their House counterparts, and we also saw they did worse than their gubernatorial counterparts. The Senate in 2022 was evenly divided, 50-50. All Republicans needed was to pick up 1 to gain control of that chamber. They nominated bad candidates across the country, and it hurt them so much so that Democrats increased their majority in the U.S. Senate. This held true in Michigan as well for Republicans. Matt DePerno and Christina Caramo struggled mightily. In my judgment, Tudor Dixon was the highest quality candidate that Republicans had to pick from, yet she still struggled raising money. She just didn't have any money and couldn't, and I'll come back to that in a second. And Democrats knew that Republicans had some troubling candidates in their competing in primaries. And Democrats spent millions of dollars helping Republican candidates win primaries. They helped bad Republican candidates win the Republican primary so that their candidate, the Democrat, in the general election would have an easier time. Maybe the best example is right here in Michigan. John Gibbs ran for and won the Republican primary in the 3rd Congressional District. The new 3rd District is Grand Rapids and up toward Muskegon. John Gibbs ran against Peter Meyer in the primary and beat Peter Meyer. John Gibbs then went on to lose to Hillary Scholten, a Democrat, in the general. And so one of the things that helped Gibbs over the finish line with respect to Meyer is that a week or so before the election, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee came in and spent about $500,000 on advertisements that boosted John Gibbs, that helped John Gibbs beat Peter Meyer. Now, John Gibbs, as I said, went on and lost to Hillary Scholten. If it's a Peter Meyer, Hillary Scholten campaign, my money's on Peter Meyer. Of course, we'll never know the result of that, so I'm safe in my prediction, but that's my hunch. Now, given that we also want to talk about sort of democracy here, well, I think there's a couple angles on this. Number one, and this one's minor because this happens all the time. Maybe not to this level or to this extent, right? But the Democrats were messing with the Republicans by trying to get the worst candidate they could into the general election. Now, look, if Republicans had the same opportunity, they would do the same thing, right? And parties fiddling with the other party's primary, pretty commonplace, but probably again not to the extent that we saw here. I think across the country, in each of these instances, the total for Democrats spending to boost Republican candidates, probably about $40 million, right? So it's not chump change. And many of the candidates that they boosted were election deniers, right? I mean, John Gibbs is all in on Stop the Steal and Trump won and all of that. So, Democrats, and they got some criticism for this from even inside their own party. Could Democrats look themselves in the eye and or look at themselves in the mirror and have a clean conscience, knowing that they tried to get election deniers on the ballot in the general? And I think the answer is probably yes, because everything's fair in love and politics and war, I guess. Oh, hey, Karen, great question about the primary in 24. Let's talk about that at the end. And that made me forget what I was talking about. Election deniers, it'll come back to me. Here is voter turnout in Michigan over time in midterm elections. Record turnout in Michigan. More people voted in Michigan in 2022 than in any previous midterm election. Here it is by county in terms of percentage, and you'll see states that are purple, and then the darker the purple, the higher the turnout. If it's yellow, the lighter the yellow is lower lower turnout. So you see places like Leelanau County, one of the highest turnouts, and that's a fascinating area of the state politically that we could talk about if you like. Here's Oakland County, pretty solid in turnout, pretty good. Livingston County, just to our west, really high turnout. And that's important because of one of the congressional races there. This is sort of the Slotkin district now. And even Livingston County is a very Republican area. Alyssa Slotkin was able to still win that district. Of course, Wayne County, not terribly surprising, but with pretty crummy voter turnout. Here it is, 18 versus 22. Counties in green saw higher turnout. Counties in sort of purple saw lower turnout than 4 years prior. Note the large increases in turnout in Livingston, Oakland, and Macomb counties. Decrease in turnout in Detroit. Abortion as the issue. If you remember, within days of Tudor Dixon winning the Republican primary for governor, the Whitmer campaign and its allies started to unleash a wave of television commercials about Tudor Dixon and her stance on abortion. And they were focused on Tudor Dixon's own words about no exceptions for rape or incest, no exceptions for life of the mother. And Democrats used those words and that issue incredibly effectively. They just saturated the airwaves with those ads. And from the get-go, right, Tudor Dixon coming off of a competitive primary she didn't even have time to pivot before the Democrats were just pounding her with these ads. And so what this did was it hurt Dixon, but it also hurt other Republicans at the same time, because it injected the issue of abortion into the political context in Michigan, when Republicans, frankly, would have preferred not to talk about it. And at the governor's level, these ads, what they did was they defined Tudor Dixon before Tudor Dixon could define herself. She had just won this Republican nomination, and still many in Michigan didn't know her. They had not heard about her. They didn't know what she stood for. Well, the Whitmer campaign and its allies took care of that. They defined Tudor Dixon as the anti-abortion candidate. And in fact, like I said, this boosted Democrats all over the place by really, I think, raising turnout, and by bringing voters to the polls who cared about the issue of abortion. And many of them voted Democratic. In fact, Prop 3 ran ahead of Governor Whitmer by percentage. Prop 3 got 57.5, Whitmer got 54.5. So there were people who came out and voted for Dixon and Prop 3. Remember what I was talking about, how Michigan's a competitive state? Well, we can see this in these data. So here's Dixon and Whitmer. So Tudor Dixon got 1.9 million votes, 44%. If we take all of the Republican state house candidates and add up their vote totals, they got 2.1, 49.25% of the vote. So Democrats won the aggregate statewide state house vote by 50.5 to 49.25, by about 3/4 of a point, right? Incredibly thin margin, very similar at the state Senate level. So for Democrats, they need to keep in mind that Michigan is competitive. They won everything, no doubt about it, but they are, and you're seeing some of this right now, the results of this, right? The Democrats have a 1-seat majority in the state house and state Senate. They are voting on, when they are voting on bills that are not bipartisan, and there are some of those, but when they're voting on partisan legislation, they need every one of their members of the caucus, which is why today you had a Democratic state house member sitting in the gallery, not on the Senate floor. She showed up to vote and has COVID. So it is and the Democrats are facing some questions about that, right? And probably fair. What, you told us for so long that COVID was such a big deal, and that we couldn't go anywhere. Now you're bringing somebody with COVID into the state house chamber, of course, making them sit up in the gallery, but still. So Democrats need to know that they are, let's put it this way, interpreting these election results as a big mandate is problematic. Here is, I think, for Republicans, a slide of major concern. And this is the gubernatorial race by county and margin, right? Gretchen Whitmer, won Macomb County, which is incredibly surprising to me. But I think that that's in part the abortion issue, driving people to the polls who care about abortion, and them voting for governor. A arguably bigger problem is Oakland County, and Republicans cannot be competitive statewide if they lose Oakland County by 145,000 votes. That is a massive hurdle to overcome, and one that would have been unheard of even 10 years ago. Alarm bells need to be going off in the Oakland County Republican headquarters. Kent County, smaller margin of victory for Gretchen Whitmer. Kent County is Oakland County 20 years ago. A county that is starting to change demographically, a county that is starting to change socioeconomically, a county that is changing politically. This is, it will, unless there are steps taken by Republicans, Kent County will look like Oakland County in a couple of cycles. Another issue about abortion. So this is not Michigan, this is Pennsylvania, but I think it's a fair comparison given the, Midwestern Rust Belt, a few population centers, lots of rural, right? So some similarities between Michigan and Pennsylvania. So and the reason I use this is, as you all know, we don't have voter registration by party in Michigan, but Pennsylvania does. So when folks go and register to vote in Pennsylvania, they have to declare a party affiliation. And in the year prior to the Dobbs decision, June 1 to June 27, right? So June to June, that's probably, let's call it 13 months. In the 13 months prior to the Dobbs decision, in Pennsylvania alone, Democrats saw their voter registration shrink by 60,000. So 60,000 fewer people were registering to vote Democrat in Pennsylvania over that time. In the few months, and this is so from June to October, actually July, August, September, in the 4 months between the Dobbs decision and election day, call it, Democrats saw their voter registration go up by about 45,000. So they almost gained back all that they lost here in those 4 months. Democracy. I've got good news and bad news for you. So number one, 2022 went off without a hitch. Even the head of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund said things went better than expected. And part of that is the fact that even the Trumpiest of Trump candidates didn't make a fuss. Tudor Dixon conceded, right? Matt DePerno conceded. And he is, again, you know, about as Trumpy as you can be. You know, the only ones that are even the only one to this day that's still causing a fuss is Kerry Lake in Arizona. So election happened, went off without a hitch. We're now in a time of governing. No problems. Midterm turnout was a key question here. And this is 18. In 2022, it was down a skosh, but still 49-ish%, 49, 48.5, I think. My point for showing you this is in the previous 40 or 50 years, the average turnout in midterms was about 40%. So we're up about 8, 9 points in the last 2 midterms over previous midterms. So that's something to keep in mind. There were some states that saw major decreases in voter turnout, including places like Alabama, Maryland, Indiana, West Virginia, even North Dakota. A 26.5 point decline in turnout between 18 and 22. And there is a reason for this. In North Dakota, I can say with some certainty. In 2018, they had a hot US Senate race. In 2022, nothing, right? So what we always see is that where there are competitive races, we have higher turnout in places, again, and some of these states will sound familiar: New Hampshire, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Nevada. All those states had significant increases in turnout, but they also had very competitive Senate races. And in Michigan's case, a relatively competitive, well, not really that competitive, but it had an abortion on the ballot. That's probably the driver. And those other states probably, my guess is that they had highly competitive races at the state level. When it comes to turnout, the state of Georgia was the epicenter of controversy in the year leading up to 2022. And, you know, we saw a change in voter laws in Georgia, with some, including the president, calling it Jim Crow 2.0. In fact, in the wake of the passage of that law, the Major League Baseball All-Star Game was moved out of the city of Atlanta and moved to Denver. In 2022, however, there was record turnout in Georgia. Record turnout. A surge of early voting. In included in that early voting was more African-American turnout than in recent general elections. And I think even the Democratic Party has forgotten about this, because one of the places that they're looking to have their 2024 national convention is in Atlanta. So, you know, times change when it comes to how we think about this stuff. And also here, this is some survey results from the University of Georgia, and it's all about experiences in the 2022 election. And what they do is they give us some really nice breakdowns here. So what's interesting is that we can see, so how did people vote, right? Some people voted absentee by mail, early in person, or precinct on election day. African-Americans voted by early in-person voting more than any other racial category.
Excuse me, Dave, we are not seeing your screen.
Oh,
We're just seeing
nuts.
a black.
Oh,
a
you know,
black-
because I set it up. You know what? Nuts. Thank you for telling me, Sally.
Okay, well, I had
It's,
to unmute myself. Okay,
It's a glitch in my PowerPoint.
okay,
I'll skip it.
there you
So here's some more mixed results. I think we'll get into that. After 2022, we see that the number of voters who say that elections were run and administered very well or somewhat well increased. Sorry about that. In their own community, and a bigger increase for the United States as a whole. Even Republicans were saying that, right? A huge increase by Republican voters who said, you know, in 2020, they were run and administered only 21% total, very well or somewhat well, 53% in 2022. This is another piece of survey data by a group that focuses on polarization in the United States. And I'm happy to report that their survey results tell us that both Democrats and Republicans see voting as very important. 74% of each say very important. That's great. So parity there. More data from Pew. Percentage of voters who are very somewhat not to or not at all confident that votes cast in person were counted. Still lacking from Republicans compared to Democrats, but an increase of 11 points for Republicans here. This is where Republicans have a lot of work to do in terms of absentee or mail-in ballots. Republicans remain very skeptical of absentee ballots. What's really interesting to me is that the aforementioned Attorney General candidate in Michigan last time for the Republicans, Matt DePerno, he's now running for state party chair. And in the lead up to that, he has said that Republicans, I'm going to paraphrase, he said that Republicans need to embrace absentee and mail voting. So Republicans are catching on to this, which is also really strange because 10, 15 years ago, Republicans were really good at absentee ballots in getting them to voters and then making sure that those voters turned them in. It was really Trump that turned Republicans off to the idea of mail voting. Now, here's some bad news. There are, and this is again from that, it's the Polarization Research Lab. So you can go to that URL and look these data up yourself. But what you've got here are what they call democratic norms violations, right? So the party in power, judges of the party in power should ignore judges from the party out of power. 13% of Democrats think that that is okay, 12% of Republicans.
Mm-mm.
Party in power, right? So the party in power should reduce polling places in areas where the out party is strong.
Mm-mm.
8.5% of Democrats say that's okay, only compared to 4.5% of Republicans. Let's come back to the biggie. So there's two where Democrats outpace Republicans. Here's two where Republicans outpace Democrats. It shouldn't be a surprise that one of them is about media. But here's one that is particularly relevant to the current era, where the president should use executive orders to circumvent Congress when controlled by the other party. Almost 53% of Democrats said that was okay, right? Where the president's got executive order power. To hell with the other party in Congress who controls one or both branches. We should just use it to go around Congress, right? So that's kind of problematic. In terms of the number of norms violations that individuals from each party supported, there were all 5 of those that were there. A small percentage of each party supported all of them. We do see that and that's really driven by that one example that I just showed you, the executive order one. So there's again some good news, some bad news when it comes to democracy. I think that one thing that should remain in our minds is that the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, have been in place for more than 240 years. They've been changed. The Constitution has been changed only a small number of times since then. In other words, the guardrails of our system are strong. And I think 2022 showed us a good example of that. So with, here we go. This I thought was also interesting, right? Is that there's support for violence by everybody, by both parties, right? Now you could question whether or not protesting without a permit is violence, but 8% of Democrats compared to only 3.5% of Republicans condoned vandalism. 3% of Democrats condoned assault. So that's pretty surprising to me. And I think that the era of people misbehaving because they're hacked off about something political is upon us. And I think that this is one area where it may get worse before it gets better. But we'll have to wait and see. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and take whatever questions you have.
I've got a question about the Gibbs primary.
Sure.
You said that that the Democratic Party boosted his campaign.
Yes.
Did they do it by encouraging people to vote for him, or did they have ads that said that he's too extreme for us and made him appear to be a Trumpster?
They ran ads and said things like John Gibbs, handpicked by Trump. John Gibbs, conservative for West Michigan, things like that, that were pretty clearly trying to get conservative Republicans to vote for him.
Yes.
Catherine posted to the chat. I'm sorry, Leah or Lee asked, do you think if Republicans were in charge, they would think executive orders are good? Potentially, but maybe a few more, right? And, this is one of those things that presidents find out, right? Where so I'll take you back to 2008 when President Obama was first running for the presidency. He was asked a couple times pointedly about whether or not he would use executive orders. Actually, I take that back, signing statements to, which is a little different thing, but it's still executive power. Whether he would use signing statements to get his way and go get around Congress. And he said very plainly, no, I won't do that. Well, it took about 5 weeks for the president to be in office, and he issued a signing statement when he signed a bill. It's one of those things that it's very easy to criticize when you don't have the ability to use it, but then when you are in power, it's hard to not take advantage of it. Catherine asks, any predictions about Arizona and Kyrsten Sinema? I assume you mean in terms of her reelection. Of course, she just left the Democratic Party and decided to become an independent. I think she's going to have a hard time in Arizona. I think she's going to see another Democrat enter the race, and I would imagine that she's going to run as an independent, and she's got supporters. I think the Democrats will line somebody up. It could be that she and whoever the Democratic candidate is sort of split that vote and pave the way for a Republican.
Well, and Gallego has already, I think he was the former mayor of Phoenix, has already entered the race.
I think that sounds right. Yeah. So, and because she has left the Democratic Party, that creates this void, right? And an opportunity. And I think you're going to see a bunch of people rush, to try to take that up.
Who do you think the Republican candidate will be?
Oh my gosh. I have no idea. I mean, I think Carrie Lake is somebody who would probably run. I mean, she's trying to stay in the news. Like she wants that kind of thing. So, she's got a base of support. It would not surprise me if she was competitive in the Republican primary. Linda asks, I'm curious about how much campaign finance reform might improve the ethics and balance of the political system. Money in politics, given that it was a rainy day today, I'll use a water metaphor. Money always finds its way in, right? I think, the last big round of campaign finance reform we saw was in 2003 at the federal level with the banning of so-called soft money, which was at the time, the scourge of politics, right? Oh my gosh, all these people are writing these huge checks. And it's being spent. Well, another avenue was discovered. Another avenue was created. And you could say that that's because of Citizens United and that. I think that's that decision is I think a little misunderstood. And we can get into that if you like, but I think one of the big problems that we have in that regard is the long string of Supreme Court cases that it does entrench the money equals speech doctrine back from Buckley versus Vallejo in 1976, right? That according to the Supreme Court, you could disagree with this. So this is the Supreme Court talking, right? The government can't limit how much money somebody spends on politics because that would be a limit on their freedom of speech. Again, you can disagree with that. It's something that is debatable for sure. I guess I just don't think and maybe it's just the fact that maybe my point is that we're beyond the point of no return, right? Where, there's just, both parties have access to such astronomical sums of money. Both parties raised this last cycle, all told, all levels, all party committees, about $1 billion each, which is, it's incredible amounts of money. So they're not going to want to give, nobody wants to disarm, right? They all want it. They all think they need it. And I don't think you're going to see much in that regard. That was way longer answer than you were probably hoping for. What else?
I think Karen had a question in the chat about moving the primary.
Oh, right. Yeah. Oh, gosh. I think that is going to be absolutely fascinating to watch. So, right, the state legislature passed a bill in the last couple of weeks, and the governor signed into law a package that moves Michigan's presidential primary up a couple weeks to the 27th of February next year. And that is part of, or in concert with, the changes to the Democratic National Committee's rules about primaries. In the Democratic presidential primary process, Michigan will now vote in the 4th slot, behind South Carolina, a couple others, Nevada, and maybe another state. So that puts Michigan in a really strong position to have a big impact on who wins the primary. Of course, that only really matters if the Democratic presidential primary is competitive. If Joe Biden runs and nobody challenges him, which I think is the likely outcome, it doesn't really matter.
Mhm.
Now, what's interesting is a little piece of Michigan legislative parliamentary procedure. Bills that the legislature passes don't go into effect until 91 days after the legislature ends its previous session. So, and the legislature generally in the past has ended its session. They adjourn sine die is the technical term. They've done that in December. Of course, that would mean that 91 days from mid-December is past February 27th. So it wouldn't go into effect. So it wouldn't be law. So what they could do is if Democrats really want to have that February 27th primary, they would have to adjourn sine die in mid-November sometime. And then that 27th date of February would be past the 91 days.
Oops, you got muted.
How did that happen? If that'll all get figured out. So where it becomes even more interesting in my view is, what do the Republicans do? Because that February 27th date violates the Republican National Committee's rules for the primary. Michigan right now, and this is a great reminder, by the way, that these primaries, all primaries, are an internal party decision, where when we have primary elections, that's the state doing parties a favor by helping them figure out who their nominee is going to be. So Michigan now is in violation of Republican primary rules if they have their primary on the 27th of February next year. If they go ahead with it, they might be penalized by the RNC like they were in 2008. It'll be up to the Republican Party powers to decide whether or not they are willing to take that penalty. So I think that's something to definitely to watch. Karen asks about the current Supreme Court, the leak attributable to Alito and the shenanigans of Ginny Thomas. You're going to have to spell out those shenanigans for me, Karen.
Well, she supposedly has used the influence of her husband and dark money to influence his vote.
His vote on the Supreme Court?
Yep.
Clarence Thomas does not strike me as somebody who would be swayed by anybody. And I also don't think that he necessarily, I'm just guessing here, right? But I given what I know about Clarence Thomas and the little bit I've read about Ginny Thomas, I don't think that they disagree on too much. So if she's influencing him, it's probably only to reinforce what he already thinks.
Mhm.
Fair.
Okay. Are there any more questions? or
I
comments?
have one more. Do you think
Yeah.
the Supreme Court has an ethics issues? I think, didn't something just come out about Robert's wife being the recruiter for all the high-powered
Yes.
law firms and getting big money? And I mean, Ginny Thomas it doesn't appear good to have her saying that the election was stolen, and yeah.
Oh God, you're totally right. Sure. I think we often forget that Washington is a small town. And the relationships that people have are, I think we shouldn't be surprised when we hear about somebody's spouse or partner being involved in another aspect of government. Now, maybe it's different with the Supreme Court, right? But years ago, when Tom Daschle from South Dakota was the Senate Majority Leader, his wife was the chief lobbyist for Lockheed Martin.
Right.
Right. I mean, so that's the kind of, and of course, today, Mitch McConnell, his wife is former Transportation Secretary, Elaine Chao. Right. So those kinds of the mixing bowl is prevalent there. And now I think you make a good point about maybe it's different with the Supreme Court because, you know, Daschle and McConnell are elected every so often, and if people don't like it, they can boot them out. And given the fact that the Supreme Court is so secretive, I mean, that's kind of how I think about it. I mean, not a whole lot gets out about what they do. You know, you can walk through the halls of Congress and get a leak every 10 seconds. In fact, if a more likely, a more surprising scenario is if you don't hear a leak from the halls of Congress. But when it comes to the Supreme Court, I mean, we all saw what a huge deal it was for that decision to be leaked. So I think I think that's a fair question about the activities of folks at the relatives of justices, because it's just a totally different beast.
Jerry, did you have a question? Or you are muted, Jerry.
Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Dave, I have a question, and I'm sure it's unanswerable. Given that Republicans are not unequivocally stupid, how did they come up with some of these candidates like Carrie Lake and Tudor Dixon and Matt DePerno and Herschel Walker and Mehmet Oz? I really am curious about that.
And the list goes on and on, right, Jerry? I mean, there's one common denominator. Trump. They're all sort of either handpicked by Trump or Trump acolytes. And I think you are now seeing the result of that, where many Republicans are starting to say, we need to move on because we can't win with Trump or his handpicked candidates. I mean, if you know, the former president is very fond of touting his record of endorsements in 2022, where he said, I endorsed all these candidates that won. Okay, fine, fair, that's true. But the vast majority of them were in uncompetitive races.
Oh.
When we look at the most competitive races in the US House of Representatives, he only made 12 or maybe 15 endorsements and lost most of them.
How long do you think McCarthy is going to last?
Well, he made it a month, which is more than maybe we'd have thought a month ago. That I think that's a more unanswerable question
In my first one,
than the first one, just because I think all it takes is going to be one of those
the 25%.
Freedom Caucus folks to say you're doing a bad job, right? I mean,
Right, goodbye.
yeah, I mean, now they would need a vote of the entire conference to
Okay.
oust him. So I'm not sure that that's going to be readily available, but I think he's in for a rocky couple of years.
Good. And is George Santos ever going to leave?
Why should he?
Oh, because he's a sociopath.
One person's sociopath is another person's representative. I mean, he got elected.
I know, but all of this came out after he was elected, I assume.
I mean, if we're going to start kicking people out for lying,
It's so egregious.
where's the line between egregious and not, right? I mean, I think that if we start kicking people out for not being truthful, how many representatives are we going to have left?
It seems from, because he's gotten so much publicity on Facebook, they take him apart.
Jerry, I'm just pulling your leg. I think he's.
I know.
But at the same time, I mean, I guess that's my point would be, where's the line, right? At the State of the Union the other day, I think Mitt Romney said to George Santos what a lot of people are saying, right? You don't belong here. The folks in his district might be stuck with him for another 2 years, 18 months, maybe, by the time the election rolls around, right? So I think that, look, if I was him, I'd stick around too. That's a pretty good job if you can get it.
$40,000 a year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Disgusting.
I do have one question. You mentioned your office hours, and on March 9th, you have this one. What time are those?
The one a week from today is 7 p.m.
What about the March 9th one?
March 9th is noon.
At noon, huh? Oh, that could be interesting. Yeah, and okay, because this is something we've been talking about, and of course, the war in Ukraine is interesting too, but
Sure.
we've really been talking about this rise in anti-Semitism. Quite interested, quite upsetting.
Well, George Santos is Jewish.
Well, good.
He says he is, yeah.
He
Okay.
amended that. Remember, he amended that because that was also a lie, and he said
Yes,
he was
right. He said his grandfather was
Jewish.
Jewish.
He's Jew-ish.
Ish, right? Which
I'm Catholic-ish.
I
If
read an
peop-
article, I read something the other day about Santos, and it was the most egregious lies told by George Santos. And it just, the list kept going and going and going and going. It was like, oh my gosh, what is happening? It was crazy.
Imaginative.
Yeah, he's going to quarterback the Super Bowl, I think.
There you go.
If people wanted to get on your email list for the Center for Civil Engagement, what would they need to do? I know I'm on their list.
I will put it in the chat. How about that?
Oh,
Perfect.
good. Thank you.
Thank you. You're wonderful.
All right, you have the things you shared are really, as a former math person, well, I'm still a math person. I love all your graphs.
Oh, yes, you would, Sally. Okay.
Very,
deal.
very, and the interpretations was just very interesting.
Great. Glad you enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you.
All right.
Anyone
Thanks for the
else have
invitation,
anything
Laura.
to add? We really want to thank you
Thank
and thank
you.
Laura
Thank you
for
for doing it, Dave.
getting you.
My pleasure. Happy to do it. Take
Okay,
care. Have a
thank
good afternoon.
thank you so much. All righty. Okay, I can't get into